along the peninsula, and they're attracting people from all walks of life. Night Beach Joe Vasquez is in San Mateo County with the staggering new numbers.
Bacteria, rodents, black water, all of it.
Americans living without homes, in shelters, or on the streets continues to rise at an alarming rate.
RV life was once the American dream on wheels, but today, for over 1 million struggling Americans,
effort to build a better Bay Area. Tonight, we're looking at a mile-long stretch of road in Marin County.
The RV has become their last refuge from the housing crisis. Campground bans, government crackdowns, and skyrocketing costs are turning these homes into traps. This is the side of RV life they don't want you to see. Let's get rolling. A new face of homelessness is spreading across American cities, and it comes on wheels. More than 1 million Americans now live in RVs, vans, and trailers, not as a lifestyle choice, but because they simply can't afford rent or a mortgage. Major cities are witnessing this crisis firsthand. In Los Angeles County, vehicle dwelling has surged 55% in just 5 years. Rows of aging RVs now line industrial areas and residential streets. Phoenix, Portland, and Seattle report similar scenes, entire blocks filled with stationary motorhomes that have become permanent makeshift neighborhoods. These aren't vacationers enjoying the open road. Most inhabitants are trapped in decades-old rigs, often unsafe and breaking down, with nowhere else to go. They work jobs, send kids to school, and try to maintain dignity while living in vehicles never meant for full-time residents. As housing costs continue rising faster than wages, experts predict these numbers will only grow. What was once an invisible problem has become impossible to ignore, a rolling monument to America's affordability crisis. For over 1 million people, the American dream hasn't just stalled, it's parked on the side of the road, going nowhere. Behind America's RV homeless crisis lies a brutal math problem. With median home prices exceeding $420,000 and average urban rents topping $2,000 monthly, millions of working families face an impossible choice. When wages can't keep pace, a second-hand RV for $5,000 to $15,000 becomes not a dream purchase, but a desperate lifeline. This isn't the glamorous van life of social media. It's a family of 4 crammed into a 30-foot trailer in a Walmart parking lot, rationing generator fuel and searching for places to legally dump sewage. The costs pile up, $70 nightly at campgrounds they can't afford, or risk fines and towing by parking on city streets. These families aren't jobless. They're working, sometimes multiple jobs. But housing has simply outpaced what average Americans can earn. The RV represents their final foothold before complete homelessness. Economists project a grim future. By 2030, 1 in 10 Americans could face housing insecurity severe enough to consider vehicle living. What's emerging isn't freedom on wheels. It's a financial trap, a rolling symbol of a housing system that has fundamentally broken down for the middle class. The American dream hasn't evolved. For millions, it's been reduced to survival in a depreciating vehicle. A devastating new chapter is unfolding in America's RV homeless crisis. Retirees forced into vehicles because their Social Security checks won't cover rent. Over 20% of Americans over 65 depend solely on Social Security, averaging just $1,800 monthly in 2025, barely enough for food and medicine, let alone housing. Desperate for affordable shelter, many seniors drain modest savings to buy used RVs, hoping for simple independence. Instead, they find themselves trapped. Aging motorhomes break down constantly, with repairs costing thousands. Many campgrounds reject rigs over 10 years old, forcing retirees onto city streets or remote desert lots where medical help is dangerously distant. The costs never stop: fuel, generator maintenance, propane for heat. Seniors who worked decades find themselves rationing insulin in Walmart parking lots or shivering through winters in vehicles with faulty heaters and leaking roofs. Advocacy groups estimate over 200,000 seniors now call RVs their primary residence, with virtually no safety net if illness strikes. One mechanical failure, one health emergency, and they're stranded. This is the unthinkable reality for a generation that played by the rules. Their reward for a lifetime of work? Not the peaceful retirement they earned, but survival in a deteriorating vehicle, hoping nothing breaks down, including themselves. Tens of thousands of American children are now doing homework by generator light, showering at gym facilities, and calling aging RVs home. School districts across California and Washington report alarming increases in students classified as homeless who live in vehicles, a childhood defined not by adventure, but by instability and hardship. Picture a family of 5 squeezed into a 28-foot RV with broken plumbing, relying on bottled water and makeshift toilets. Meals come from gas station microwaves. Privacy doesn't exist. The constant hum of generators disrupts sleep, while frequent relocations to avoid parking tickets mean missed school days and broken friendships. Teachers see the toll firsthand. Exhausted students struggling without internet access for assignments, embarrassed by their living situations, falling behind academically. Advocacy groups estimate over 100,000 minors currently live full-time in RVs nationwide, numbers climbing yearly as housing costs spiral. These aren't families choosing nomadic freedom portrayed on Instagram. They're parents working multiple jobs, desperately trying to maintain normalcy while raising kids in vehicles.
It is inexcusable to accept Washington with homelessness of this dimension.
Designed for weekend camping trips, not permanent residence. For these children, the RV isn't an adventure. It's poverty with wheels, a rolling classroom in survival, and a daily reminder that America's housing crisis has stolen their childhood stability. As RV encampments grow, cities are fighting back, not with housing solutions, but with bans, fines, and mass towing operations that push vulnerable families deeper into crisis. Los Angeles, San Francisco, Denver, and dozens of other municipalities have outlawed overnight RV parking on most streets, imposing fines up to $500 per violation. But the real devastation comes during towing sweeps, nighttime operations where entire blocks of RVs are impounded at once. For families already living paycheck to paycheck, reclaiming a towed RV is virtually impossible. Towing fees exceed $1,000, with daily storage charges climbing rapidly. Most never get their homes back. In one night, they lose everything: shelter, belongings, often their only asset. Officials justify these crackdowns citing public safety and neighborhood concerns. But critics argue the policies simply criminalize poverty, offering no alternative housing while making survival illegal. Advocacy groups report thousands of RVs seized annually, erasing not the problem itself, just its visibility. For those living inside, the message is clear: you're not welcome here. The crackdown feels less like law enforcement than an attempt to hide America's housing failure by literally towing away the evidence, along with the desperate families trapped inside. A quiet policy is making RV homelessness even more desperate: the 10-year rule that bars older rigs from most campgrounds and RV parks. Any vehicle over a decade old is automatically rejected, no exceptions, regardless of condition or maintenance. For struggling families, this rule is devastating. Most can only afford RVs priced under $10,000, typically 15 to 30 years old. Even when they scrape together money for nightly campground fees, the door slams shut based solely on their rig's age. Campground operators defend the policy as preventing eyesores and safety hazards. But the real effect is discriminatory. It systematically excludes the poorest Americans who desperately need legal, safe places to park. Retirees in well-maintained 1990s motorhomes and families in older trailers are turned away, forced onto industrial streets, remote lots without water or electricity, or illegal encampments. With over 1 million Americans now depending on RVs as housing, the 10-year rule pushes a massive portion into illegality and danger. Critics call it prioritizing aesthetics over humanity, transforming campgrounds into exclusive clubs for wealthy recreational travelers while abandoning those using RVs not for leisure, but for survival. The message is brutal. If you're poor enough to need affordable shelter, you're too poor to park here. For over 1 million Americans living in aging RVs, every day is a survival gamble against fire, illness, and hazardous conditions. Most rigs are decades old with faulty wiring, leaking propane lines, and broken plumbing, ticking time bombs that desperation forces families to inhabit anyway. To stay warm or cook meals, residents improvise dangerously. Indoor propane heaters, sketchy extension cords pirating electricity from streetlights, generators running non-stop. Los Angeles County firefighters alone responded to over 200 RV fires in 2024, many from makeshift heating or cooking setups. Sanitation creates equally dire health risks. Without sewer hookups, clean running water becomes scarce. Families ration bottled water for drinking, let alone bathing. Skin infections, dehydration, and disease spread easily in cramped, unsanitary quarters. Basic hygiene becomes impossible. Public restrooms and gym showers are lifelines, when available and affordable. These aren't mere inconveniences, they're life-threatening conditions. What started as desperate housing solutions spiral into health crises, burns, respiratory illness, infections. For America's RV homeless, survival itself has become the daily danger. As RV encampments multiply, they're igniting fierce community backlash. Neighborhood associations report streets lined with deteriorating rigs, accumulated trash, and overflowing waste. In Seattle and San Diego, complaints about vehicle encampments have surged over 40% in just 2 years. Residents cite legitimate concerns: fire hazards from faulty generators, crime, drug activity, and plummeting property values. The pressure on local governments is intense. Clear them out, neighbors demand. Cities respond with aggressive towing sweeps and parking bans that displace rather than solve. Even private campgrounds are shutting doors, raising fees or restricting long-term stays to avoid becoming homeless parking lots. The result is a brutal game of displacement. Push RV dwellers from one neighborhood, and they simply reappear in another, sparking fresh outrage. Some cities attempt safe parking programs offering legal spaces with basic services, but funding is sparse and slots fill immediately, leaving thousands stranded. The community anger is understandable. Nobody wants unsafe conditions near their homes. But the backlash reveals something darker: a housing crisis so severe that communities would rather hide the problem than address its roots. The fight isn't really about RVs, it's about whether America will confront its affordability failure or simply keep moving the desperate out of sight. The RV homeless crisis isn't just a housing issue, it's become a public safety nightmare both inside encampments and in surrounding neighborhoods. With over 1 million people competing for scarce resources like water, electricity, and safe parking, tensions boil over into violence. Police reports paint a grim picture. Portland alone logged hundreds of RV-related calls in 2024. Theft, assaults, and disputes between desperate residents fighting over generator access or parking spots. Drug activity thrives in these chaotic clusters, where traditional law enforcement struggles to maintain presence. RV dwellers face threats from all sides. Outside criminals target encampments knowing rigs contain tools, electronics, and valuables. Organized theft rings strip catalytic converters, worth $500 to $1,500 each, leaving families stranded with disabled vehicles. Break-ins are constant. Inside, residents sleep with weapons nearby, install jury-rigged alarms, and trust no one. The psychological toll is devastating. Constant hypervigilance, trauma, paranoia. Mental health crumbles under relentless fear. When survival itself requires guarding possessions 24/7, the line between victim and perpetrator blurs. Some residents turn to theft or worse out of desperation. The encampments become feared by neighbors and unsafe for inhabitants, a vicious cycle where poverty, crime, and danger feed each other. Campgrounds once offered RV dwellers a crucial lifeline: electricity, water, safety, and a semblance of normalcy. Now, as homelessness surges, these refugees are slamming their gates shut. Private campgrounds complain that long-term residents bring deteriorating rigs, clutter, and declining property appeal. Their solution? Price out the poor. Nightly rates have skyrocketed to $60 to $100, impossibly expensive for families surviving on $1,500 to $2,000 monthly. At those rates, a month's stay costs more than most apartments. Parks also enforce strict stay limits of 14 to 30 days maximum, forcing constant, exhausting relocations. Pack up, find another spot, repeat. An endless cycle that drains both finances and spirit. Even public lands offer no sanctuary. The Bureau of Land Management has slashed stay limits in many areas from 14 days to just 7. citing overuse and sanitation problems caused by the influx of desperate families. For over 1 million Americans depending on RVs as their only shelter, the collapse of campground access eliminates their last legitimate option. What's left? Overcrowded Walmart lots, industrial streets, hidden corners where they pray to avoid police. Campgrounds have transformed from support systems into gatekeepers, pricing out and pushing away those who need help most, driving vulnerable families deeper into illegality, invisibility, and danger. For decades, free overnight parking was a survival tool for struggling RV dwellers. Walmart lots, highway rest stops, and public lands offered places to sleep without draining already empty wallets. That safety net has collapsed. Walmart, once synonymous with RV-friendly hospitality, now bans overnight stays at over 70% of its U.S. locations. Highway rest areas post threatening signs. No overnight parking. Violators will be fined $100 to $300. National Forests and Bureau of Land Management lands have slashed stay limits and deployed more rangers to enforce them. For families surviving on $1,500 to $2,000 monthly, losing free parking is catastrophic. They're forced to choose: pay $60 plus nightly at campgrounds they can't afford, or risk fines and impoundment by parking illegally. Many gamble on the latter, parking in dark industrial zones, constantly moving before dawn to avoid tickets. Advocacy groups estimate hundreds of thousands now have literally nowhere legal to park. The closures aren't about safety or cleanliness, they're about making poverty invisible. America's famed open road tradition has become a cruel joke. What once symbolized freedom and welcome now means hostility at every turn. For over 1 million Americans whose only crime is being unable to afford rent, the message is clear: you're not wanted anywhere. For over 1 million Americans living in RVs, health isn't just declining, it's becoming a death sentence. Without stable addresses, many can't access clinics that require proof of residence. Most lack insurance. Medical problems that should be routine become catastrophic. A toothache festers into a life-threatening infection. Diabetes goes unmanaged until emergency hospitalization. Advocacy groups estimate nearly 40% of RV homeless adults suffer chronic conditions, yet receive virtually no consistent care. The vehicles themselves are health hazards. Inadequate heating causes hypothermia during freezing winters. Older rigs without air conditioning become ovens in summer heat, triggering heat strokes and dehydration. Improvised propane heaters fill enclosed spaces with carbon monoxide, sending residents to ERs, or worse, killing them silently while they sleep. Mental health devastation runs even deeper. Constant fear of towing, theft, and displacement breeds depression and crippling anxiety affecting thousands. Yet psychiatric care and medications remain impossibly expensive. Many ration critical prescriptions or simply go without, watching their conditions worsen. The cycle is vicious. Poor health makes finding work harder, deepening poverty, worsening health further. Emergency rooms become primary care for those who can reach them. For America's RV homeless, the fundamental right to health care is evaporating. Each day, more people trapped in deteriorating rigs face a brutal choice: suffer in silence or risk financial ruin seeking help. Over 100,000 American children are trying to get an education while living in RVs, vans, and cars, and they're losing the battle. School attendance becomes nearly impossible when families constantly relocate to dodge tickets, towing, or campground expulsion. Each move means a new district, lost credits, severed friendships, and starting over. Without stable internet, homework is a fantasy. Remote learning? Forget it. Teachers report students arriving exhausted from generator noise that rumbles all night, unwashed because there's no shower, unable to focus because home means fear and instability crammed into 200 square feet. The academic toll is devastating. These students fall behind quickly, missing assignments they can't access and lessons they're too tired to absorb. Research shows homeless students are 87% more likely to drop out of high school, virtually guaranteeing they'll repeat their parents' poverty cycle. Some advocacy groups attempt school bus stops at RV encampments, but funding is scarce and stigma keeps desperate families hiding from authorities who might involve child services. For these children, education, supposedly the great equalizer, the pathway out of poverty, is collapsing before their eyes. The American promise that hard work and school lead to success rings hollow when your classroom is an aging motorhome and your desk is a fold-down table you share with 4 siblings. The opportunity gap isn't just wide, it's becoming permanent. The RV once embodied the American spirit: freedom, adventure, endless horizons. That romanticism is dying fast. With over 1 million Americans forced into RVs by economic desperation, public perception has turned sharply negative. RVs are no longer vacation vehicles, they're rolling symbols of systemic failure. In Los Angeles and Portland, residents don't see travelers. They see eyesore encampments threatening property values. Media coverage has shifted from scenic national parks to crime statistics, RV fires, and overflowing sewage. The open road now feels dangerous, not liberating. This stigma punishes everyone. Recreational RVers traveling by choice face hostility and suspicion. Campgrounds implement harsh restrictions, assuming all RV owners are destitute. Neighborhoods oppose RV-friendly parking laws, fearing they'll attract the wrong element. The RV world has fractured into 2 incompatible realities. Instagram influencers showcasing $200,000 luxury rigs visiting pristine destinations, versus the invisible masses, families and seniors surviving in deteriorating 1990s trailers, hiding from police. This perception shift has real consequences. Negative stereotypes fuel political support for bans, towing sweeps, and criminalization. What communities once welcomed, they now reject. Unless housing affordability improves dramatically, the RV will complete its transformation, from icon of American independence to permanent marker of economic desperation. The open road is closing, one no parking sign at a time. The numbers tell a chilling story. From over 1 million Americans living in RVs today, housing advocates project nearly 1.5 million by 2030. Rising rents, stagnant wages, and relentless inflation are pushing more families toward RVs as their last stop before sleeping on streets. Yet policy responses remain woefully inadequate. Some cities experiment with safe parking programs, fenced lots offering bathrooms, security, and basic hookups. But the scale is laughable. Los Angeles serves fewer than 500 vehicles, while thousands remain scattered illegally citywide. These pilot programs are band-aids on a hemorrhaging wound. Without massive investment in affordable housing, the crisis will metastasize beyond major cities into small towns and rural highways. Technology may make survival even harder. Surveillance drones and automated license plate readers will hunt down RVers trying to stay invisible, making hiding nearly impossible. Advocates warn of a terrifying normalization, vehicle homelessness becoming a permanent American underclass. The RV, once sold as freedom incarnate, risks becoming the defining symbol of a nation that has locked millions out of basic shelter. This isn't just an RV crisis, it's a human crisis.
It has become the Skid Row for RV homelessness in LA County. People without a home living in hundreds of RVs.
Begin with the horrific crash of a tour bus in western New York outside of the city of Buffalo.
There's a hidden war happening on America's streets. Not against crime, not against danger, but against the poor who live in RVs. Every parking lot, every curb, every rest stop has become a battlefield where laws erase homes on wheels. Homelessness isn't being fixed, it's being punished. Let's get rolling. Across dozens of American cities, new ordinances are making it illegal for RVs to park overnight on public streets, even when the vehicles are well maintained and not blocking traffic.
Along the peninsula, and they're attracting people from all walks of life. Night Beach Joe Vasquez is in San Mateo County with the staggering new numbers.
For the growing number of people who call their RVs home because they can't afford traditional housing or campgrounds, these laws create an impossible situation. The penalties are harsh. Fines typically range from $50 to $150 per citation, with enforcement officers often issuing tickets in the early morning while residents sleep. For someone already struggling financially, just 2 tickets in a week can mean hundreds of dollars in debt. Repeat violations can lead to vehicle impoundment, with release fees exceeding $500, costs that can permanently separate people from their only shelter. These ordinances force RV dwellers into constant motion, unable to establish any stability in a community. They can't maintain jobs, receive mail, or access services when they're required to keep moving every night. While cities frame these rules as public safety measures, they effectively criminalize poverty. For people living in RVs out of necessity rather than choice, no overnight parking laws don't solve homelessness. They just make survival illegal, pushing vulnerable residents further to society's margins. In cities nationwide, oversized vehicle restrictions require RVs and large vans to move every 2 to 4 hours.
Get a handle on the hundreds of trashed RVs that are just showing up on city streets, many with homeless people living inside.
City leaders say the problem is actually an epidemic. Our Lisa Balick is live at Lentz Park. So Lisa,
A rule designed to prevent abandoned vehicles, but creating devastating consequences for families living in their vehicles. For homeless RV residents, this means waking up multiple times daily to relocate their entire home, then desperately searching for another legal parking spot. The financial toll is crushing. Constant relocations can add $150 to $200 monthly in fuel costs alone, money these families don't have. Meanwhile, enforcement officers specifically target RVs that appear to be permanent residences, making tickets almost inevitable. Private parking lots charge $20 to $40 daily, far beyond most families' budgets. This forced mobility destroys any sense of stability or safety. Parents can't establish routines for children, workers struggle to maintain employment, and everyone lives in constant fear of the next citation or tow truck. What appears on paper as neutral vehicle regulation becomes, in practice, a relentless eviction system. These families aren't choosing this lifestyle. They're trapped in it, criminalized for the basic human need for shelter and rest. The cruelest housing ordinance may be the simplest: laws that make it illegal to sleep in your vehicle. For people whose car, van, or RV has become their only shelter after losing housing, these bans criminalize the most basic human need: rest. Cities like Los Angeles impose fines of $25 to $75 for first-time sleeping violations, with penalties escalating for repeat offenses. But the real trauma comes at 2 or 3 a.m. when officers bang on vehicle doors, forcing exhausted families, including children, awake and demanding they move immediately. A single neighbor complaint can trigger this midnight harassment. Unlike apartment dwellers facing eviction, vehicle residents have nowhere to go. Their home is also their transportation, leaving them driving in circles through the night, burning precious fuel just to avoid citations. Children suffer interrupted sleep cycles while parents live in constant anxiety about the next knock on the door. These laws don't solve homelessness, they criminalize it.
News investigation into what's essentially becoming homeless encampments on wheels. So-called van lords are renting out RVs to people who are now using them as their permanent residence. Who's behind these rented rides, and is doing this even legal? Here's Eyewitness News reporter Cristian Cordero.
What was once a housing crisis becomes a criminal justice problem, trapping families in an expensive cycle of tickets, court appearances, and sleepless nights. For people already struggling with poverty, banning sleep transforms survival into a crime, making it nearly impossible to rest long enough to rebuild their lives. Many cities now require permits or reservations for overnight RV parking in designated areas. While this system works for middle-class tourists planning weekend getaways, it creates an insurmountable barrier for people living in their vehicles out of necessity.
Well, the Low Income Housing Institute is the group tasked with pulling this off. They say they're looking at about 12 sites right now, have yet to narrow it down to where this could actually become a reality, though they say the services they provide.
Permits typically cost $15 to $40 per night, totaling $450 to $1,200 monthly, equivalent to apartment rent that these residents couldn't afford in the first place. When you're already choosing between fuel and food, permit fees become impossible luxuries. The reservation system makes things worse. Permits often sell out weeks in advance, requiring the kind of long-term planning that's impossible when you're living paycheck to paycheck, or check to check. Homeless RV dwellers can't book next month's parking when they're not sure where tomorrow's meal will come from. Miss a permit? Face fines up to $200, nearly a week's worth of groceries.
Amanda and Mark, we stood here a week and a half ago and told you about that RV going through the pool house wall. Today, Seattle police told me that they're still looking for 2 suspects. The loss expected to be here now more than $300,000, but the owner.
This creates a 2-tiered system. Acceptable RVers with disposable income get legal spaces, while the poorest residents are pushed into hidden, unsafe areas where they risk citations and towing. Rather than providing affordable solutions for those who need shelter most, permit systems erect financial walls that force homeless families further into the shadows, criminalizing poverty while protecting privilege. Cities nationwide enforce 72-hour rules, requiring RVs to relocate every few days, even from legal parking spots. While designed to prevent permanent encampments, these laws trap vehicle residents in an exhausting cycle that makes normal life impossible. Consider the impossible logistics: a parent trying to maintain their child's school routine while moving their entire home every other day, a worker attempting to hold down a local job while constantly relocating, someone recovering from illness forced to pack up and drive while still sick. The financial toll is devastating. Moving a large RV every 48 to 72 hours burns $100 to $150 weekly in fuel, money these families desperately need for food and basic necessities. Constant engine starts and stops accelerate mechanical wear, leading to expensive breakdowns that can strand families permanently. When an RV breaks down and can't move by the deadline, it becomes an easy impound target, potentially costing someone their only shelter. Families live in constant stress, never able to establish routines or feel secure. These rules don't address homelessness, they institutionalize instability. By treating homes on wheels as temporary nuisances rather than legitimate housing, cities force their most vulnerable residents onto an expensive, exhausting treadmill where stability becomes impossible. Many RV parks enforce a strict 10-year rule, banning any recreational vehicle older than a decade, regardless of its condition or maintenance. This seemingly cosmetic policy creates a devastating barrier for people living in their RVs out of necessity. While affluent travelers can afford newer rigs costing $40,000 to $100,000, homeless families typically rely on older, affordable units from the 1990s or 2000s. These vehicles may be mechanically sound and well cared for, but their age alone disqualifies them from safe, legal camping spaces. The rule forces the most vulnerable RV residents back onto streets where enforcement is harshest. Some parks offer exceptions, but the application process, requiring photos, inspections, and additional fees, creates yet another obstacle for families already struggling with basic survival. For people who've lost traditional housing, being rejected based on their RV's age feels like discrimination against poverty itself. The message is clear: only those who can afford newer equipment deserve safe places to park. This private business policy functions as economic gatekeeping, separating desirable tourists from those living in vehicles out of desperation. Instead of providing inclusive shelter options, the 10-year rule pushes homeless families into industrial areas, remote lots, and other dangerous locations where they remain hidden and unsafe. For people living in RVs without electrical hookups, portable generators provide essential power for heating, cooling, and food storage. But noise ordinances that ban generator use during quiet hours, typically 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., create deadly dilemmas for homeless families. These are precisely the hours when power is most critical. Frigid winter nights requiring heat, scorching summer evenings needing air conditioning, or anytime food must stay refrigerated. For elderly residents or those with medical conditions, losing climate control isn't just uncomfortable, it can be fatal. Alternative power sources like battery banks and solar systems cost $1,000 to $5,000, far beyond the reach of people already choosing between fuel and food. This leaves families facing an impossible choice: risk $100 to $300 fines for running their generator, or endure potentially dangerous conditions inside their only shelter. Enforcement often follows neighbor complaints, meaning a single call can bring police to shut down someone's only power source in the middle of the night. While noise ordinances help housed residents maintain peace and quiet, they strip homeless RVers of basic survival tools. What seems like a reasonable community standard becomes a life-threatening barrier for those with no other options, forcing them to choose between legal compliance and staying alive through the night. Owning land should mean freedom to live on it, but zoning laws across America make it illegal to reside full-time in an RV, even on your own property. This devastating restriction eliminates what seems like the most obvious solution for homeless RV families: parking on a friend's lot, family land, or their own purchased acreage. Cities justify these rules as protecting sanitation standards and property values, but they effectively criminalize one of the few affordable housing options available to struggling families. Violations can trigger weekly fines of $500 to $2,000, threatening to bankrupt low-income landowners who dare to offer help.
The city of Olympia is trying something new that no other city in our region has done before. It will allow RVs to stay parked on a city street indefinitely if its occupants abide by a set of rules.
Fox 13's Matt Markovich joins us now. So Matt,
Rural areas offer no escape. Building codes typically require permanent structures before anyone can legally occupy land. This forces RV residents back into public spaces where street enforcement is harshest. The cruel irony is unmistakable. People who scrape together money to buy land, hoping to escape the cycle of citations and displacement, discover they still can't legally live there. Those generous enough to offer their property as refuge face financial ruin through escalating fines. These zoning restrictions prove that homelessness isn't simply about lacking money. It's about laws that systematically block people from accessing affordable solutions. When even private property ownership can't provide legal shelter, the system has criminalized poverty itself. For homeless RV families, few nightmares compare to waking up to find their home gone, towed by city enforcement for parking violations, unpaid fines, or abandoned vehicle designations. Recovery is virtually impossible. Towing fees start around $350, while daily storage charges of $50 to $100 accumulate relentlessly. For people already living paycheck to paycheck, these costs might as well be millions. Within weeks, accumulated fees often exceed the RV's actual value, prompting authorities to auction it off rather than wait for payment. This isn't just losing transportation, it's losing everything. Families watch their shelter, belongings, medications, identification documents, and sometimes even pets disappear in a single enforcement action. Years of accumulated possessions, irreplaceable photos, and survival essentials vanish into an impound lot they'll never be able to afford.
So Hunt says if you are living out of an RV or trailer, you technically do have shelter, making you ineligible for either of the pellet shelter or tourist shelter sites, or even that alternate third camping ground site.
Cities justify these aggressive impound policies as keeping streets clear, but they rarely offer alternatives for suddenly displaced families. Instead of solving homelessness, towing deepens it. Lose your RV, and you're thrust onto the street with no resources or path back to stability. For someone whose rig represents their only lifeline, a tow truck isn't merely an inconvenience. It's a devastating forced eviction that can destroy years of progress toward rebuilding their life, leaving them more vulnerable than ever. Highway rest stops once provided safe refuge for all travelers, but new restrictions across many states now ban overnight sleeping, posting signs warning no overnight camping or limiting stays to just 2 hours. For people living in RVs, this eliminates crucial safe spaces. Rest areas offered homeless RV families something invaluable: well-lit, patrolled environments safer than the alternatives. With these havens now off-limits, families are forced into dangerous back roads, deserted industrial zones, and isolated lots where crime rates soar and help is far away. States enforce these bans with $50 to $100 tickets, while repeat violators face towing, the ultimate threat for someone whose vehicle is their only shelter. The cruel irony is unmistakable. These facilities were built with taxpayer money, yet the citizens who need them most are explicitly banned. For nomadic workers traveling between cities for temporary jobs, rest areas provided predictable places to regroup safely. Now survival requires constant searching for hidden corners to park, dramatically increasing both stress and physical danger. What seems like a reasonable policy to prevent loitering actually removes one of the last public spaces where vulnerable people could rest without harassment or fear of violence. For families living in their RVs, losing access to rest stops means losing their safest option for sleep. Cities nationwide are enacting sweeping public camping bans that classify sleeping in any vehicle on public land as criminal trespassing. Sidewalks, parks, and even vacant lots become forbidden territory for people whose RV is their only shelter.
In Los Angeles, a place to park is fast becoming a place to start over for thousands of people there living in RVs.
Under these laws, a family quietly parked on an unused city lot faces the same penalties as someone breaking into private property. Fines typically start at $150, but refusing to leave can trigger misdemeanor charges, turning poverty into a criminal record that haunts families for years. This criminalization creates a vicious cycle. Homeless families accumulate charges that later disqualify them from jobs and housing opportunities, making escape from homelessness even harder. Children watch their parents get arrested simply for existing without traditional shelter. The cruelest aspect is that these bans rarely come with increased shelter capacity. Cities aren't solving homelessness, they're just pushing it out of sight, forcing families into more remote and dangerous locations. For RV dwellers already facing stigma and rejection, camping bans deliver a clear message. You don't belong anywhere, not even on unused public ground that taxpayers fund. Rather than designating safe areas where families can legally exist while rebuilding their lives, these laws treat basic survival as criminal trespassing, deepening both vulnerability and desperation, while criminalizing the fundamental human need for shelter. Perhaps the cruelest twist in anti-RV legislation is how it criminalizes those who try to help. Many jurisdictions now impose hefty fines, often $1,000 per violation, on property owners who allow RVs to park on their lots, even temporarily. Churches that once opened parking lots for safe parking programs face shutdown under zoning codes. Nonprofits offering overnight refuge get hit with nuisance violations. Neighbors who might offer their driveway to a struggling family stay silent, terrified of penalties that could bankrupt them. This systematic criminalization of compassion cuts homeless RV families off from informal support networks that once filled gaps in social services. Small acts of kindness, letting someone park overnight, share an electrical outlet, or use a restroom, become legal liabilities rather than community solutions. The message is unmistakable. Not only are homeless families unwelcome, but anyone who shows them mercy will be punished too. This isolates vulnerable people completely, eliminating the grassroots solidarity that communities have always used to help neighbors in crisis. When laws make basic human decency illegal, homelessness transforms from a personal struggle into a manufactured crisis enforced by policy. Rather than addressing root causes of poverty, these rules punish both victims and helpers, creating a society where survival becomes a crime and compassion carries criminal penalties. For housed families, letting vehicle registration or insurance lapse means an inconvenient trip to the DMV. For people living in their RV, it can trigger the loss of their only shelter. Cities exploit these technical violations as justification for aggressive enforcement. A missed $200 registration renewal, impossible when choosing between food and paperwork, becomes grounds for impoundment. Once tagged for expired tags, families often have just 48 hours before towing begins. The mathematics of destruction are swift. $350 average towing cost, plus $50 to $75 daily impound fees, mean a family needs over $1,000 within a week to reclaim their home. For people already unable to afford basic registration, these sums might as well be millions. The system's cruelty deepens when you consider that many RV dwellers can't even receive renewal notices. They lack stable mailing addresses to get the paperwork that keeps them legal. This creates an impossible catch-22. You need an address to maintain vehicle registration, but you need legal vehicle registration to have a place to live. Rather than recognizing these bureaucratic barriers, enforcement uses them as weapons against the poorest residents. A single piece of expired paperwork becomes the legal trigger for destroying someone's last safety net, turning administrative poverty into homelessness with ruthless efficiency. Living in an RV requires regular waste disposal, gray water from sinks and black water from toilets.
Road, right next to St. Peter's Providence Hospital in Olympia, where RVs have been parking illegally for years. But now something new: permitted RV encampment parking on a public street.
For middle-class RVers, this means routine stops at campground dump stations. For homeless families, it becomes an impossible financial burden that can destroy their lives. Dump fees range from $10 to $25 per visit, with many facilities tied to campgrounds charging full overnight rates just for access. When families can't afford these costs, choosing between food and waste disposal, they face an agonizing dilemma with no legal solution. Cities enforce sanitation codes ruthlessly, imposing fines of $500 to $1,000 for illegal dumping, even when someone pours out a small bucket of gray water. A single violation can financially devastate families already choosing between fuel and meals. Enforcement sweeps often use sanitation violations as pretext to clear entire RV communities, labeling all vehicles as public health hazards. Yet these same cities rarely provide free or affordable waste disposal alternatives, creating a system designed to trap people in violation. The cruel mathematics are inescapable. Staying sanitary requires money these families don't have, but remaining unsanitary triggers devastating penalties. This isn't public health protection. It's criminalizing basic human biology. Rather than providing accessible waste disposal solutions, cities use sanitation laws as weapons against their most vulnerable residents, forcing them to choose between poverty and prosecution for the crime of being human. Faced with increasingly hostile laws, homeless RV families develop elaborate survival strategies that exploit legal technicalities while avoiding outright violations. The most common is the 72-hour shuffle, moving every 2 to 3 days, sometimes just around the block, to reset enforcement timers. This cat-and-mouse game demands constant vigilance and planning. Families memorize which streets have which time limits, when enforcement officers patrol, and how far they must move to avoid recognition. Some park in industrial areas overnight where enforcement is lighter, then relocate to safer neighborhoods during daylight hours. Others invest in periodic campground stays, a single night weekly, to generate receipts proving legal parking if questioned. Some rely on borrowed driveways from sympathetic friends, though this risks zoning violations that could bankrupt the property owner. A few families coordinate movements between multiple cities, staying just ahead of local enforcement patterns while burning through precious fuel. While these workarounds can buy temporary reprieve, they extract a devastating toll. Constant stress, mounting fuel costs, and permanent instability that prevents families from establishing any routines or relationships. The very existence of these elaborate survival strategies exposes how little legal space actually exists for vehicle dwellers. Rather than solving homelessness, restrictive ordinances force people into exhausting games of bureaucratic survival that wear down their health, finances, and hope, keeping them moving but never bringing them closer to actual stability or dignity. The future for homeless RV families hangs in the balance as two opposing forces shape policy nationwide. Cities face a critical choice that will determine whether vehicle dwelling becomes impossible or evolves into a legitimate housing solution. The crackdown path leads toward increasingly harsh restrictions, expanded street parking bans, stricter permit requirements, and aggressive towing programs. If these trends continue, urban areas could become completely inaccessible to RV dwellers, forcing vulnerable families into dangerous rural isolation where services don't exist. The compassionate path shows growing promise through innovative programs. Some communities are launching safe parking initiatives where churches and nonprofits provide secure lots with restrooms and stability. A few forward-thinking cities have piloted designated RV zones, recognizing that homes on wheels are still legitimate homes. Nonprofits increasingly frame this as a housing and public health issue rather than a law enforcement problem. The stakes couldn't be higher. Continued crackdowns will simply convert RV homelessness into street homelessness, making the crisis more visible and dangerous while solving nothing. But pragmatic solutions, safe parking areas, affordable dump stations, and supportive services could transform RV living from a survival trap into a stepping stone toward stability. The The next decade's direction depends entirely on whether policymakers choose to see RV dwellers as nuisances to eliminate or neighbors deserving protection and pathways to permanent housing. One knock on the door can erase an entire home. That's the reality RV dwellers face every night. What do you think? Should cities keep cracking down or finally create real solutions? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't miss our next video where we dive even deeper into the struggles RVers face on the road. See you there.